Move the mouse here, and we're back in City Skylines with another episode of the how-to series. Now, I wanted to do a video for each one of the DLCs, and I thought a good place to start was mass transit. So far, we're doing pretty good managing traffic in our city, and we're in the 90s when we look at the info views, which is a great place to be for traffic. Anywhere in the green really is not a bad place to be, but 94% is fantastic. So the way that we've been able to do that so far is by focusing on things like metros, buses, and trains. And these all do a great job at moving people around the city. But we've got a few extra options when it comes to mass transit, and that's what I want to talk about in today's video. So, for the first one, I'm going to need to buy a new tile, and this one up here in the top left looks good because it's got some steep terrain for us to work with. Now, if we wanted to get from the bottom to the top, one thing that's not usually an option is a straight shot up this incline. The slope is too steep and it won't let us build a road there. And what we could do is we could come out and build kind of a switchback up the side of the mountain. And this is much more realistic. If we follow the grass, that's generally where it's a little bit less steep. And that should let us build up the terrain here. And we can kind of work our way up the side of the mountain. And do something like that. And that ends up being a little bit more natural, a little bit more what you might see in real life for working your way up a mountainous terrain like this. Now, the other thing we could do is we could tunnel into the mountain. And then come up this way. Like that. Building switchbacks or tunnels is one option for going up the mountain, but another option that we have thanks to mass transit is cable cars. Now there's two buildings here, the cable car stop, and then the end of line cable car stop. Now you can end a line at the regular cable car stop, but for the purposes of this video, we're going to focus on the end of the line stop, because we're just going to do an A and a B. Now, keep in mind that the stop itself, the cable cars are going to enter and exit from the back side of the building away from the road in this case. So now we've got to get this connected with the cable car cables. Now, you can't angle these too much, right? Because they'll kind of cut into the building there. A cable car can't go at that extreme angle. Now, you may have to be careful, and you can raise and lower just like you can with roads. Up and down on the D-pad, or page up and page down on PC. But again, we can take a much more direct path with these than we could before with the roads. So that is all connected. The only thing that we have to do is power it, and that will get our cable cars running. We don't have to water them to see them work. And that's all I'm interested in right now. So let's throw it on 3 times speed. See the cable cars start zipping out. You don't need to define lines like you do with other mass transit options. Just simply having a cable car stop along that will become a stop that Sims can get on or get off at. And once they get to the top and the end of the line, the cars will stop briefly and then head right back down the other side. And it's the same thing down at the bottom at that end of line stop. So this is a really great way to move people up really steep inclines where roads might be a little bit more difficult, or you might have to snake them around the terrain to make them work the way that you want to. Now, you could also use cable cars to traverse a flat obstacle like this river, but we've got water-specific options in the form of ferries thanks to mass transit. So for ferries to work, you need a couple different buildings. One that you absolutely need no matter what is the ferry depot, and this is where the ferries start and end their shifts. We need that no matter what. And then we'll need at least 2 of another type of building, which is the ferry stops themselves. So this is a small ferry stop. Considerably larger is the ferry pier, which can handle 2 ferries at once. And then we also have the ferry and bus exchange stop, which combines stops for multiple buses into the same building as a ferry stop. So if you want people to transfer from line to line, that's a really easy way to do that. Now, you could also add bus stops to the roads outside any of the ferry stops if you wanted to achieve a similar effect. But obviously this is a much more organized way if you have a ton of different bus lines coming to transfer and move people across a waterway. One other thing worth noting is if you have canals running through your town, the small ferry stops can actually clamp onto the sides of canals. And it's a nice way to add some other modes of transportation around your town. Now, when you do create canals and slap a ferry stop in there, you'll notice that there's a yellow dotted pathway on there, and that's something that we need. It's automatic in canals, but we need to define that anywhere in open bodies of water. And it's basically like building roads for the ferries. So we need to provide them a path to get from point A to point B. And just like with roads, they'll figure out what the most straightforward path is. If there's a shorter route, they'll take it. But now that we've set all the buildings up and defined pathways for the ferries to be able to travel around, now we need to define lines that actually differentiate where they're going to stop. Now you can't and don't need to put anything at the depot itself, because that's just where the ferries originate and retire to at the end of the day. What we need to do is define those stops at ferry stops, ferry piers, maybe even up in our canal if we wanted to, and then down here at our exchange. And then just like with the other lines, we have to close that loop and complete the line. And they'll find the most efficient way to travel that route based on the pathways that you've allowed. And they also adhere to traffic standards. So if you're on right-hand driving or left-hand driving, they will follow that side of the waterway. So those are ferries, and that's another nice option if you've got a lot of water on your map, or if you want to bring water into your map with canals, you have an option for moving people around that way. The last piece that I want to talk about today is my favorite aesthetically, but it does have some downsides to it, and that is the monorails. Now the downside to it is that it can be very noisy, especially around the stops. Other than that, I love pretty much everything about monorails, and I really should build them into my maps more. Now, there's a couple different things we can do when it comes to monorails. So let's start with the regular standard monorail station. This sits on the side of the road, and I think a great spot to do this is right next to our train station. And maybe we could bring people up here into our industrial area, maybe here, just the edge of the zone. And as you can see, this sits on the side of the road, and now we have to connect it with monorail tracks. And just like with roads, we can curve, we can freeform, we can do all sorts of things to bring that through our zones. And just like with buses and metro, we need to define a stop and complete the line, and that will move people from point A to point B. And if we throw it on 3 times speed, we'll see that those trains should pop in right away. There we go. So that's a really cool way to have kind of an elevated train feel in your town. Now that's the first station, which sits on the side of the road. Alternatively, if we want to knock out a little piece of our map here. So with monorails, the second station in is a monorail station with road. And this has a 4-lane road on it. So we can snap that to an existing piece of road. Now you could have monorail tracks that come out the back of the station and off roads, or you can actually turn your roads into monorail capable roads. So they have 2 options here. The 4-lane, which we'll see right there, and then we have the 2-lane option as well. So we'll upgrade this existing road cutting through here to support monorails. Now, with these that are over the roads, just like we did before, we can define a start and an end stop. And obviously we could have more running up and down either side. I love monorails because it's a nice, easy way to add an elevated train look to your town without having access to mods if you're playing on console or vanilla on PC. But there is one downside that I mentioned before, and that is the noise pollution. So the stations themselves are incredibly noisy. Now you can see when the stations are this far apart, the noise bubble from one barely fades out before you're picking up the noise bubble from the other. So these are best used in commercial areas. And in fact, if you look at my zoning here, there's a reason that I kind of do commercial along the busier strips that connect areas, because they're willing to put up with that noise where residents would become sick from it. So if you're running monorails kind of along main avenues where there's already a commercial presence, that noise bubble effect isn't quite as bad, but it's just something that's really important to keep in mind. You don't want to have a monorail network running right through your residential areas, for example. Now, I dropped 2 other buildings on the map too, just to show you real quick. And this is the monorail / bus hub. So basically exactly what it sounds like. You have a monorail and multiple bus stops that can happen within one building. And then we also have the triple combo monorail, train, and metro station. So this has 2 train tracks, 2 monorail tracks, and a metro station built in underneath. So we can see that we've got the metro tunnels we can connect from. So this is a great way for having multiple lines of transport get all connected in a certain area. And if you wanted to, you could do something like the bus station right across the street, and this would give you a ton of transport options in a really small space. Now, I'd have to double check, but I also think the multi-platform stations were something that were added in as part of mass transit. But since we already talked a little bit about trains, I'm not too worried about these particular buildings. They're basically just larger versions of the train station. So the multi-platform end station and then a multi-platform train station. Both of those allow Sims to very easily transfer from one line to another. And just like we saw with the cable cars, one is the end of the line and the other one can be the middle of the line, where multiple train platforms might meet. But since we talked about trains before, I didn't want to dive into that too much. Cable car, monorail, and ferry were the 3 things that we really wanted to talk about this episode, because those are all new mechanics that came into the game thanks to mass transit. Now, there are 3 different unique buildings that are unlocked also as a part of mass transit, and I'm just going to plop those in right over here. Well, 2 of them at least, because one of them requires water, and that is the boat museum. So this is just a museum for boats. We have the locomotive halls, which is a museum for trains. And then we have traffic park, which is like a little go-kart park to teach traffic safety to the Sims. So those were 3 buildings that were added in as part of the mass transit DLC. But the things that we really wanted to talk about today were the ferry, cable car, and monorails. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you do have questions, let me know in the comments down below, or better yet, follow me on Twitter and join the Discord to get involved in the discussion. If you're new here, subscribe for more videos and consider hitting the bell to get notifications. But until the next one, this is Move the Mouse, signing off.